What if I told you that there was a man who reached the height of his power as the empire upon which he derived that power from basically died? That empire came to a dramatic end right as he reached his peak of power. This, my friends, is the story of Martin Bormann, Hitler's personal secretary, who derived an immense amount of power from his close access to the Fuhrer. And Bormann leveraged this in every way possible to derive immense amounts of power from the fact that he controlled everybody's access to the Fuhrer and to Hitler. And Bormann was basically the second most powerful man in the Third Reich, particularly in the final 2 years under which the Third Reich, of course, was clearly by that point was on its way to defeat and to elimination. However, the moment at which he reached his pinnacle of power for Bormann actually came inside of the Fuhrer bunker in the last 2 weeks of the war. In the last 2 weeks of April of 1945. And you're like, well, what did he do to reach that point? And how is that high water mark measured? Well, in Hitler's last will and testament, came into force after he offed himself in that bunker on April 30th of 1945, his final will and testament named Bormann as the head of the Nazi Party. This would have been the peak of his power if not for the fact that there wasn't even a Nazi Party left worth leading at all. The Nazi Party by this point was, for all intents and purposes, vanished. There was no party left worth leading. The Reichstag, which was their parliament, had ceased meeting weeks before. And so being the head of a party that had all of the seats in the Reichstag or the German parliament could be construed a high water mark, but then again, by this point that body had ceased to meet. And even when it was meeting, it was basically just a rubber stamp for Adolf Hitler. So Bormann reached the peak of his power being named the head of the Nazi Party. However, of course, by this time Hitler was gone. The German army, or the Wehrmacht, was well on its way to defeat and would actually, from the day that Bormann only got to enjoy being the leader of the Nazi Party for 1 week, which is from May 1st of 1945, when he took over the day after Hitler's passing, to the 8th of May 1945, when the Germans completely and fully surrendered to the Allies. All 4 of them, mind you. And so Bormann won what could be called a Pyrrhic victory. And actually, he didn't even last the whole week. We did not know exactly whether that was true or not for a long period of time. And we don't know exactly when he went out. But we do know that on the day after, on May 2nd of 1945, Bormann made a run for it with some of Hitler's secretaries and a small party. He made a breakout attempt of his own to escape Berlin, fled the bunker, and for many years we did not know, even have any idea exactly what happened to the man. Stalin, for his own personal reasons, spread rumors that Bormann had escaped to South America. And so Brazil had numerous fake Bormann sightings for decades after 1945. That said, we found out in 1973 that he never made it to Argentina or Brazil. In 1973, his remains were discovered and confirmed through dental records as a result of being excavated in a construction project in Berlin, very near the former Führer bunker site. And it is circumstantially assumed that Bormann, through toxicology tests done on his remains, also wound up taking himself out, if you know what I mean, with cyanide capsules. There were traces of this found in his by now largely decomposed self upon the excavation in 1973. And it can be reasonably assumed that Bormann had taken the cyanide pill, crushed in his mouth, and died on the site. But we don't know that exactly for sure. But given that it was still May 2nd, the defenders of Berlin were still fighting at that moment. Had he survived another day, he would have been past the point where I talked about in yesterday's edition about Helmuth Weidling and his surrender of the Berlin Defense Forces, also on May 2nd of 1945. After this happened, had Bormann survived until May 3rd of 1945, he would not have been facing fire. He would not have been facing live ammunition fire from the Red Army. And he likely would not have gone out this way. And so, Bormann, of course, there was still live fire going on, so he took the cyanide and ended it for himself on the spot. And he was discovered there 28 years later in 1973. Now, hold on. Now, a lot of this is circumstantial. A lot of this isn't fully confirmed. But we do know that he took his own life in Berlin, probably sometime before the Weidling surrender. Rather than be taken out by the Red Army, he took himself out. But a few days before this, he reached the pinnacle of his power. But again, in a almost dead regime by this point. So there you have it, guys. The man who reached the height of his powers as the very empire that he drove those powers from ended. So that was a fun doubleheader today. So hey, this is Jason with What Have I Told You? I'm just going to say peace out, homies.